Hello and welcome to the aForm show. My name is Alan George and thank you very much for tuning in. Each week, we sit across from thought leaders and change makers in the architecture and design space of the GCC. We dive deep into their experiences, both professionally and personally, and share their valuable insight as to what makes them tick. Our goal is to add value to your day and help you navigate your own personal creative journey. Finally, the opinions and the views of the guest speakers are that of their own. They do not necessarily represent the views and the opinions of the show or the host. Welcome to the show, everyone. This week, we are joined by Jason Burnside. He is one of the few architects in the city of Dubai that has seen its evolution over the last 2 decades. In 2001, Jason left London to join the prestigious Godwin Austen Johnson, affectionately known as GAJ. Since then, he has been part of and led many projects that have gone on to be design and commercial successes. Having worked on various market sectors, Jason is known for his Midas touch across the education sector, something which we are definitely going to get into in this episode. In fact, he is also considered to be an industry leader for the same. So without further ado, let's get into it. Hi, Jason. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me. Pleasure.
Awesome. So when kind of researching you, it was very difficult to find a starting point. Where does one start with a sort of career that you've had, the work that you've done, and so on? So I'm going to start very basic and let's see where we go.
Sure.
Right. Obviously, education is something which you're clearly involved in. The pandemic has probably changed the way that we look at schools and interact with schools. Granted, we are sort of maybe on the back end of the entire thing at the moment. The first question that I want to start us off with is, from a operator point of view, are you seeing briefs sort of changing, not just because of the pandemic, but in general over maybe the last decade? Are schools wanting to do more?
So it's a really great question to start with. It's a difficult one to answer in terms of just making it obvious if it's a decision led by operators, whether the education market is changing itself. So therefore, are the changes coming from the way that teachers want to teach? And has the pandemic maybe influenced it? And I would have to say, well, actually, it's probably a little bit of all of those together and that combined effect. So what I mean by that is, operators at the end of the day, they want the schools to be efficient. They want to be able to work out in terms of the facilities, what they need to fit within that bracket of fee and that fee income. Teachers, on the other hand, aren't, they're not aware of what that means in terms of the financials. So what they're looking for is the best of everything. They want the biggest spaces. They want the best spaces. They want the best technology. And I think what we're seeing now, certainly with the pandemic, is an acceleration of investment maybe into infrastructure and certainly into the digital medium. So therefore bandwidth and higher cable capacities within schools. And that's being forced on them because the switch to needing to move to online learning has meant that, every teacher now has to have access to the internet. Every student needs to have access to the internet. And I think the success of how Dubai's education system has got it through the pandemic has been almost the immediate reaction to being able to provide that. And I think that's great because we've got a lot of buildings here which are relatively new. They may already have had that capacity just by way of the design and the time frame in which it was built. But even the slightly older schools, I think, have been able to respond to it incredibly quickly. If you were to compare that maybe with countries in Europe or North America where schools are maybe a couple of 100 years old, right, to try to get that infrastructure, those backbones installed into those schools is obviously going to take time.
Right.
And also I think that what you have to factor in is that the willingness of students to embrace bring your own devices or working from home is part of the economics. You have to factor in that maybe 2 or 3 siblings in a household all needing to buy a laptop at the same time is not something that every country can offer. So I think that the response in Dubai in terms of being able to get that rolled out as quickly as they did was fantastic because it allowed the schools to stay pretty much seamlessly open by way of either online learning or physically. What we're seeing now in terms of the physical environment is that schools play a really important role in education. And that's obvious by its statement. But what's not so obvious is that it's the social interaction that you get by going to school. It's the physical education. It's the music classes. It's all the things that you need a child or a student to do needs to be done really in those environments. Because that's what we're now finding is that, these kids learn better from each other.
Right.
And then going back to one of the points that you made earlier is that the teachers wanting to change the way that they teach is I think a direct response in terms of how well now students are learning from each other. together. So therefore teachers become more facilitators rather than dictatorial. It's less of the schools that we grew up with blackboards where you wrote, learn. Now that is now starting to become a different strategy, which is the idea of the flipped classroom, where a lot of that rote learning can be done from textbooks in the evening. But what can't be replicated at home is the interaction and the collaboration that maybe a team of 4 or 6 students can get by problem solving, brainstorming, coming up with solutions, but building other skills, confidence in presenting, being able to stand in front of a team of classmates and sell your idea. Right. And that's what we'll see probably moving to the future is that the skill set, the soft skills that these students develop in schools will become ultimately much more important for an agile world where now we're responding to pandemics. We have to change the way business is done. I mean, how many businesses closed down during the pandemic and how many businesses emerged during the pandemic as people try to move very quickly from one income source to another shows that I think that this agility and this versatility in terms of how you apply yourself and your thought, I think starts way back in the classroom when you get that confidence to be able to innovate and collaborate. So I think that we'll see, moving forward, I think we'll see a much bigger shift in terms of how schools are designed to creating more collaborative spaces. And the hard fact of having student numbers dictated by classroom sizes, we may see the reverse being pushed back onto the operators where they're saying, okay, well, we can't quite make the classroom that small anymore. We have to factor in that we're going to need 2 square meters per pupil or even more so that there is more flexibility in how the school can stay open. And again, Dubai was incredibly fortunate. A lot of new schools are designed to much more generous space standards. Some of the older original schools suffered because, again, they were designed for much smaller populations at the time. And therefore, when the space standards came in to ensure the pupil safety, that started to dictate that actually some year groups had to learn from home. Right. And I think moving forward, office design, the fact that everyone is now looking for a villa, not an apartment, is everyone starting to realize that we need space. And these ideas of pressure coming from real estate and rental, that is going to become secondary to the quality of space that we choose to work in or to learn in.
Right. I think the idea of collaborative spaces is one of a lot of interest because me personally, I did a lot of my schooling in one of these older schools in Dubai, a couple of decades back, of course. Okay. I'm not going to say when, but quite literally my entire schooling has been done in Dubai. So I understand how in these older schools, these collaborative spaces weren't necessarily factored in. And it is unfortunate. And I see that having a very profound impact on the students of today when they interact with these spaces. So is there any way, what would be, can older schools bring this in somehow?
I think they can. To give you an example, Brian Johnson, the founding partner, designed most of the first wave of private schools in the region. So Dubai College, Jess, Al Kabara in Abu Dhabi. And again, they were responding to a need. And the need was, maybe 10, 12 students per classroom. So the idea of the space standards, I think, existed then. And maybe without the technology that we have now, they still had to be learning spaces that were well lit, well ventilated, well connected, and spaces that the children wanted to learn in. What's happened is that school of maybe 200 pupils is now a school of 1,200 pupils, and it's maybe organically grown over the last 40 years, like Dubai College. And they're still one of our clients who come to us regularly to say, well, look, these are the population numbers that we're at. What can we do to improve, let's say, collaboration spaces? Can we take this block and maybe can we start to look at removing some classrooms and joining spaces together? And actually what we find is that, I would say, 9 times out of 10, there is a way that we can improve the environment. What we can't change, unfortunately, with the older buildings is the kind of fragile nature of how they were constructed, because again, they were constructed at the time when load-bearing walls were permitted. Right. That's obviously since been changed, and we're now looking at concrete frames. So there's a balancing act then that sits between the economics of demolishing versus the additional cost of preserving. Right. And what we're trying to advocate with them is that part of the charm of your master plan is how it has evolved over the years. And if we can now start to repurpose spaces rather than thinking about keeping the same idea that it's always been a maths classroom, so it'll always be a maths classroom, what other functions can we swap them around with? And does that mean that we can maybe potentially remove a building with very low occupancy rate and very low density and replace it with maybe a G+1 or a G+2 structure, which would allow us to give you the new purpose-built facilities? And then we start to look at how the overall master plan can then actually probably be reimagined to bring in these innovative collaborative spaces. And one of the buildings that we're talking to them about at the moment is exactly that. It's a a collaboration hub, which sits next to the new sports hub. It's a sports performing arts center of excellence. So that now what they're trying to do is in the back of the campus, away from the original buildings, is start to develop this new spine of facilities which are specific to certain subjects, but it is giving the students now this opportunity to experience kind of the older part of the school balanced with this new state-of-the-art part of the school. So I think, in short, yes, it is possible, but there's a lot of factors that come into just how to reuse buildings, which I think Dubai will eventually start to embrace, because we all know, even from an environmental perspective, the benefit in not demolishing structures and not releasing that carbon back out, actually looking at how we can maybe upgrade buildings and start to preserve some of the fabric of these original master plans.
I mean, that's awesome. That sounds like exactly the way it should be. I, for one, am completely against demolishing completely for the exact same reason. Yeah. I sort of want to pivot to maybe the industry in a more macro, broader sense. Mm-hmm. Clearly, you've done a lot of schools in the region, been part of them, designed them, delivered them, and even see them in operation. Mm-hmm. This isn't really to badmouth anyone per se, but I kind of want to see from your eyes, what are the kind of missteps that you're seeing designers make with other schools? What are they missing out? What are these basic things which you see that maybe they're just not getting right?
I don't think there's any harm in architects questioning design. I don't think there's any harm in us actually learning from our own mistakes or other people's mistakes. And I can probably maybe see that the trend, going back to your own journey through your schooling here. I mean, schools were very much seen as factories. You just pour the students in, you learn, you come out the other end, you're a better person. And I think that what schools have become is they've become a place that you want to go to. You want to go there and learn. You want to go there and hang out with your friends at break time, or you want to go and excel in sport. And what we're seeing, I think, now is this shift away from education being a chore to something that education gets you motivated about wanting to go and collaborate. So I think that the lessons that we're probably talking around the edges of are just that I don't think it's appropriate anymore just to have a long corridor and classrooms stacked along either side, because we all know that the negative effect of that is that it felt like you were forced to go there. You were forced to learn. And this connection with this lifelong learning and being lifelong learners or being global students or global citizens, I think now starts again at that very early age, where your environment has made a massive impact on your understanding of your immediate surroundings, but the people around you, and actually how to get more from it. So the schools that we're trying to create now really do focus on that almost paternal side of what's missing, where, you're going to school, but you don't feel like you're isolated. You feel like you're part of another family. It's just not your mum and dad or your brother and sister, but you're there with your friends. And we're trying to ensure that the quality of those spaces are designed specifically for those age groups.
Right.
And that those age groups benefit then from the changes in ergonomics. And again, it's around creating these kind of nurturing environments as opposed to these very hostile environments. And I don't mean hostile in any kind of threatening way, but I mean in terms of just the kind of lack of imagination, the lack of engagement between the building itself and the user. And I think that no matter for us, whatever the brief, whatever the budget is, we will always try to find a way to see if we can improve the quality of the student's journey throughout that school. And I think for me as a designer and as a parent, I think if we ever fail to deliver that, then I think it'll be the day that we probably need to stop designing schools, because I think we'll have lost that human element of what education is about, and it's passing on knowledge, not making people resent the idea that they're being taught.
Correct. I think that's absolutely right. That's how it should be.
Yeah, it should be, but it's amazing how, it just takes certain cultures and certain education systems longer to make these changes, because again, it's not broken. So why fix it?
Right.
But you only realize that you're in that predicament when actually you're thinking, but why do we have low attendance rates? Or why do we have, certain grades, and other schools are getting much better grades, or they're making students, they're getting better jobs in better, in better international companies. And I think that it all comes down to that. It all comes down to the reason that you go to school is to get all of those life skills, not just to get your A star. It's actually to come out of there even with a lower grade, but with a greater sense of confidence and worldliness that actually will see you perform better as an adult and as you go into the workplace.
Okay. I then want to maybe zoom out a bit more looking at the region, because, just off air, and a lot of the guests that we've had before constantly keep bringing up Saudi at the moment. Yes. There's a big flurry of work, literal cities, sort of just coming to life at the moment. I kind of want to get your thoughts on the education sector there, because it is a different culture for sure as compared to, maybe what the Dubai market is. Yourself and Gaj kind of looking at what the education sector there is. What is their kind of appetite? What are they looking to do?
I think it's not just us. I think everyone is looking at the education opportunities within Saudi Arabia. And I think that maybe the big difference, let's make a direct comparison, maybe the big difference with Dubai. Dubai's been a city largely populated by expatriates.
Right.
Saudi is a country with a very small expatriate population by comparison. So I think that it has to deliver now in kind of two separate arenas. And one will be obviously making sure that the national schools program that they have can deliver better quality education and learning facilities. Because again, that's what they need. They need that investment in their own infrastructure. And I think that with that will come the need to build more. That will attract more developers. It'll attract more opportunities for people to think about relocating to Saudi Arabia because for work reasons. But that will bring with it a certain increased element within the expatriate populations. And obviously what they're looking for as well is to make sure that it's not just single professionals that are moving there, that actually you're bringing the whole family and everybody's getting the enjoyment of living in a different country and being together as a family. So with that will come a demand for international schools and private schools. And I think that at the moment we're already starting to see the signs, and certainly around the big epicenters like Riyadh, where a lot of the mega development headquarters are at the moment, there is an increase. Certainly a lot of expatriates have relocated there. Now, what's probably lacking at the moment is that the speed at which this has occurred, there will be no doubt some shortages in international school places. So the first thing I can see they'll probably need to do is start to correct that. I'm sure there's lots of operators that are already looking at opportunities and partnerships with local Saudi schools to offer an international curriculum as well. We are working on 2 schools in Dammam at the moment for the British and the American school. And again, one thing that you mentioned earlier is that, we do have to be respectful of the desire to have segregated schools at this particular point. The schools that we're doing in Khobar, because they are international schools, they are allowed to be co-educational. So again, there are many changes that are happening there. I think it's like everything, it's just going to take a little bit of time for that level of offering to maybe start to balance out. But I think there's certainly, there's a lot of movement already in the tertiary education sector within the kind of universities. But I think there's been a lot less interest in the middle and lower parts of the education system, which is going to change. For sure, it's going to change.
Okay. Interesting take. I never really thought of it that way. If you think about the actual population in Saudi as how many local citizens they actually have as compared to, say, here. That is quite interesting. I then, as sort of a final question in this sector, I kind of want to ask you from your experience, is there a particular product or particular design, school, be it with Gaj, outside of Gaj, whatever it may be, something which you saw as a very unique mix, which maybe hasn't been done before, which maybe stood out?
That's a great question. The miracle product. I'm not sure I can think of immediately of a particular product. I think I can probably give better examples of ideas that are being tested, ideas that maybe are beyond even being tested. They're there and they're being used and they're being very successful. And I think because we started with Dubai College, I probably wanted to keep with Dubai College at the moment. As I said, it's been a fantastic opportunity for us to grow with that particular school over the last 40 years. They came to us, it was almost maybe 5 years ago, to look at adding an additional sports hall to their existing sports hall. And after a long consultation with them, numerous designs, we decided that actually probably the best thing to do would be to demolish the existing sports facilities. Now, that sounds relatively straightforward, but when you're an active working school, to not have sports facilities, no sports hall, no swimming pool for a year.
Harder.
Well, in this climate, you suddenly realize that logistically, it's something that actually you probably would give most schools enough headache just to say it's not worth it. But in saying that, there was some great vision with the bursar at the time to see that there was an opportunity there to really deliver something above and beyond any other school in the region. And I think what we worked on and what we've created for them is something quite unique. It's a mix between this idea of high level of sports performance, but also in terms of the rehabilitation, in terms of performing arts spaces. And it became this kind of blend of a number of different kind of almost competing to some extent functions, but brought together in a way that actually meant they could get much more value out of the piece of real estate that they had. And it was an unusual mix when we first started kind kind of playing around with this idea, this concept. And I think when you go there, when you see the students interacting with it, it's only been 1 year. That's not even, actually, it's not even 1 year. It's probably more like 10 months they've had the facility. The students have just transformed. They themselves are just now so much more enthusiastic about going to their sports, going to their drama lessons, because the facilities that we've now been able to provide them are so different to what they have had previously, that actually now it's bringing this new kind of level of desire to train, or to go and do your sports lessons, to do your sports education certifications and exams. And I think that, we'll probably see more of this now as we see the school market try to find different niches. So, schools that maybe have been traditionally academic, that have had little investment in sports over the years, are suddenly saying, well, maybe we need some more sports facilities. We need to offer more than what our competitors are offering. And there's certainly been a lot of interest now from other schools, because I'm still in touch with the PE department. I'm still in touch with the suppliers, and they're saying, wow, this is really on Instagram and social media. There's people like contacting us from Saudi Arabia, from America, just to find out a little bit more about what we did, what we supplied, how did we do it. And I think that's great. Again, it's for us, when we designed it, we were just designing very much to do with that particular client. But to see that it's had a wider appeal, and to see that it started to spark some debate around what's possible within the budget of a secondary school, to see that it's delivered above and beyond everyone's expectations has been fantastic. And again, now that we have it, I'm almost thinking, well, why doesn't every school have it? And I think that maybe that's what we'll start to see, is this blending of functions and space into something that's much, much more relevant to how people live and the lifestyle choices that we make now, and how important the health sector is and fitness sector is in everybody's lives. Yeah.
I think that leads into my next question very well, which was going to be, I can see how it would be difficult for an operator to maybe be open to, kind of pushing the envelope a little bit. Mm-hmm. But now that it seems to become the norm, maybe there are a lot more, but is that just my assumption? Is it now become the norm to sort of see how much more we can add into the program when it comes to operators in this space?
Again, I think going back to one of my kind of previous answers or discussion points, was that there is an economic balance. I mean, at the end of the day, schools have to charge a fee. You need to keep that fee as competitive as possible. So at some point, someone somewhere in the chain has to pay for these additional facilities. Now, some schools can offset it because they've got higher populations, student numbers within the school. So there's a way of subdividing that out. There's other schools that maybe want to limit their numbers. Now, obviously, then the cost per student increases. Right. And if there is if there's more than one sibling at that school, you have to then think about how attractive as a package that school becomes to potential parents.
Right.
Because you're buying into something that's got great facilities, but actually, wow, look at the fees. We can't afford that. So again, I think what's maybe becoming more apparent in all of that is that there's more choice than there's ever been. And I think that's been one of the great things. There has been, it's acknowledged, there is oversupply in the market, but that oversupply has brought with it, as I say, more choice than there's ever been. And I think the established schools who've had held a reputation for a long, long time, they're still maintaining and they're maintaining it by delivering excellence, whether that's excellence in education, results, sport, kind of student that comes out of those schools. I think we'll see them continue for a while. I think until the point that, again, that there's demand for school places, and then people will maybe start to choose around different things. And we talked about COVID and maybe how big is the school? How spacious is the school? People will make other decisions in terms of just actually, well, my child is going to be there for maybe 12 years. How do they start in kindergarten and how do they progress all the way through? Is that even an option? Some schools maybe don't even offer a primary education and some don't offer a secondary education. There's few of them now, but that used to be the case. So I think the student journey, and I think there's so many factors now that are coming into it that I think that as a parent, you're trying to balance a huge amount of options, but I think you're also trying to buy into the culture of the school. And what is it the school provides, as I say, is this kind of holistic approach to well-being, to learning. And operators are starting to become more attuned to what the public want. Right. And I think that's good. I think it's probably long overdue in some instances, because we all know and we see the benefit of, as architects, what we preach day in, day out about the quality of light, the quality of, the air within the spaces, the journey from corridor to classroom or classroom to dining hall. for us, it's stuff that we just inherently want everybody to have access to. But we've learned over the years that sometimes the pressure of real estate, the investment, the chain, the stakeholders, everyone that's invested in that don't necessarily share the same outcomes or the same objectives. And we're starting to see some correction there and some buy-in, because it is adding value to those schools, and it is starting to increase interest, and it starts to put them in a bracket that now parents are saying, well, this is great. This is the kind of school I want my child to go to. So it's positive. It's positive in that sense.
Awesome. Very, very excited, to be honest. It seems like a space that could really be doing a lot of great stuff. So it's great to hear from you that, that's kind of the direction that they're taking. I kind of maybe want to change gears a bit at the moment. Sure. Because as an architect, as listeners to the show who are architects rather, we tend to get a very young audience, sort of, fresh grad, mid-level, that kind of range. And I always, when I get someone of your caliber on the show, I always want to sort of pick your brain to kind of see, lessons learned, to put it very broadly, across your career. Maybe something which, people can learn from, something which you think have been pivotal points in your career, which have, kind of skewed you into the direction that you went to. Anything of that nature. Yeah, let's just give it maybe a top 3 or how many ever you can.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's not something you ever think about until you're asked, is it? And I think that it's very difficult just in the moment to think about things that redirected you maybe in your career. But I think that maybe it all starts back in university. I think you're a product to a large extent of how you were mentored at university, and really what passions did they ignite within your desire to become an architect. And I think that all the way back to that very, very early first couple of lessons that I took at university, it was just trying to get my head around, everyone talks about detail. Everybody talks about, it's in the detail. And I suppose it's the more that you learn, the more that you design, the more that you build, you start to really appreciate how materials can come together, and the joy of even traditional architecture, the lessons that we can learn from construction techniques, or the lack of material. And that's maybe not something that you could just now go grab a book and go, right, I've got it. That's that one ticked off the list because he mentioned it. It's, I think, never letting go of that natural inquisitiveness that we have to want to understand how something was built. And is there any lessons in there that we can say, well, actually, do you know what? Maybe that detail doesn't apply anymore because we now have steel beams, and a steel beam can span 10 times longer than that original piece of timber.
Right.
But what I love was the relationship between maybe this space to that space. And what we're trying to do is understand how maybe technologies allowed us to design differently, but never to really forget the importance of context and designing for context, and actually being responsible architects who, we all love the Instagram moment, but at what cost? I mean, we need to, as a profession, continue to make sure that we are the profession that looks after the environment, that protects cities, that fights for cities, that fights for old buildings. We talked about it earlier. Why do we have to have everything demolished when maybe it has some architectural merit? And not just here, but I think now certainly the Northern Hemisphere is going through a phase of demolishing many kind of beautiful concrete buildings that we all admire as architects because of how we were educated. But you think, well, in another 50 years' time, is that going to be a loss of and a big hole in our, in our history that will never be replaced because of a lack of understanding, or maybe even a lack of maintenance on those buildings? So I think that, as I say, I've drifted way off what you originally asked, but I just think that inquisitiveness, that idea that we are here as builders. We're still builders, and maybe building on that. One of the things I did very early in my career as well was I took a course in just general building as well. So be a bricklayer for a day, or be a carpenter for a day, or be a plumber for a day.
I do have a follow-up question on that, but please continue.
Okay, well, I was going to say, I think until you're actually trying to lay some bricks, you do realize how difficult it is. Or you're trying to get plaster to stick on a wall, and you think this is a flat surface inside a technical college. This is tough, and then you take that to site, and it's 40 degrees, and you're complaining as the architect as to why they can't do it in the way that you want it. And I think that sometimes, again, the lesson from that, to bring it back to the drawing board and explain to the junior staff that, look, have you tried to do that? Do you know how difficult that is? And you're asking them now to do shadow gaps and this and that and the other. And you think, well, actually, maybe sometimes that's another part of the learning curve that we're not taught at college, which is the appreciation for detailing and how do materials come together. So does that make a better building at the end of the day? And I think that legislation has changed in large parts of the world where we do now as architects have to think about the welfare and the safety of construction staff who are put out onto sites to build these wonderful buildings. But what risk are they taking to do that? And I think that what I've really enjoyed for the last couple of years is almost this resurgence in finding traditional detailing. And you go now to probably any magazine, any website, and you're seeing beautiful buildings with beautiful brick detailing and this newfound appreciation for materiality, which 5-10 years before that was all replaced with large expanses of glass and metal and steel. And you think how great it is that these crafts are actually starting to come back almost on point again. And I think that architects understanding how to detail that is such an important part of your growth. Maybe the final one for me is maybe also humility. I mean, I know that sounds a bit out there, but I actually think again that what we need to do as a profession is listen. I think that quite often we're very keen to tell clients that we've got great ideas. And I think more recently for me as well, one of the things that I've become a bit more inclined to do is just to say, guys, it's, if it's not working, let's just stop. Let's just take 5 minutes. Let's throw it in the bin if we need to. Let's go back to the drawing board. Let's think if there's some other way that we haven't looked at this. And I think not being frightened to tear things up, throw it in the bin and start again, and acknowledging that sometimes that humility is in us not trying to force design issues, not trying to create designs that really don't want to be there. And I think that we are not really taught that at university, because what we're inspired by is these amazing structures that we're inspired by getting out there and trying to push the boundaries at every opportunity. And sometimes we miss the obvious answers. Right. And conveying that to clients, sometimes we miss the obvious ways. Sometimes we miss the obvious tact of being able to convince clients of how to embrace a design, because we're so preoccupied by the likes on social media, or the kudos that's going to come from having the shiny building, not the building that's really nicely detailed and put together and it's got the right sense of place. Right. So again, I say for me, I think there's been the longer in my career, I think I find more of a connection now with just buildings that are subtle, buildings that are just stood the test of time, buildings that you can still look at and go, that still looks amazing, and they're not quite often the screaming out there structures. Yeah. And I think that's, that just comes with maturity. And I think that anyone starting their career now should really look at the breadth of what architecture can offer, but to try and find something to appreciate in every one of those stages, because we are like sponges. You will remember it. You will draw on that detail again at some point. And it might even just be the play of light on a textured surface. But I think that's what makes architecture what it is. It's just elevating it above the norm. Yeah.
Agreed. I think you touched upon many points, and I think they all kind of feed into each other, in the sense that if I were to go back to you, laying bricks, literally laying bricks, there's a sense of humility that comes with that, right? And it all kind of just feeds into each other. So I think that, yes, definitely, those are points which the younger generation definitely needs to think about. Yeah. I have a bit of misstep. I very recently, I must admit, have gotten kind of dove headfirst into detailing. Yeah. And I find there's something quite meditative about it, if I must be honest. Yes. If you do it correctly. Yeah. And I just a simple thing was, when I was on site about a couple of weeks back, I realized that this kind of lighting cove that I designed with these, C channels and everything, it beautiful, works on paper. And then I realized that the person kind of installing it on site, his fingers couldn't really get
into the gap.
And something as simple as that, I would have never known if I was just in the studio. Yeah. The detail worked, everything was fine, but nobody could actually physically install that. Yeah. For something as simple as that. Yeah. And that's why I think the importance of site work for architects at all stages, I think, is quite key. I think that at some point it becomes, maybe in school, it's kind of something which you tick off the box. Maybe you're not that exposed to it, but I kind of want to know from Gadget's point of view, because you clearly have a staff that, is quite young as well. Yeah. For a lot of them, do you see that there's a big interest in going to site and learning these things at the moment?
I think we're starting to see certainly a lot more appreciation for it. And I think that when their concept has been rejected 3 or 4 times, And
that's a sign.
Yeah, it's a sign that not because we're just, we're not interested in how you're designing, but, the QS has said we can't afford it.
Right.
The client is going, look, sorry, please don't show me that again because I asked you for something else. And it comes back, as I say, to this humility, coming back to listening. What is it that they're asking you for? How can you get into the DNA of what they really want here? And how can you innovate from something as simple as 2 or 3 materials? And I think that they're starting to join the dots now.
Right.
I think the one thing that happened, maybe 5-6 years ago was the fascination with parametric design. And whilst it's a great asset to have, whilst it has freed up so many ways of thinking, I think with it has come maybe this exploration into parts of architecture and design that would never have existed before. But it has almost become a must-have. And I think it's actually starting to take that back to day one, back to your first lesson in architecture school, and actually say, like you just mentioned with your own example, but how would we build it? And that shouldn't stop you from wanting to build it. It should just actually come from a design that needs it. And I think that it comes back to maybe my first experience at university, which was just more about the purity of architecture, form following function. We're working in Saudi Arabia at the moment in the Diriyah area. I haven't been in the region for 20 years and not really ever getting the opportunity to look at Najdi architecture. You look at it and you think that, wow, I mean, these buildings are maybe 300 years old. But if I was to take my camera and frame a couple of really carefully positioned shots, they look incredibly contemporary and they have a tactile quality that I would never want to replace with glass or steel or anything else. So it's this constant refinement of your skill set. And I think that the younger guys that we have in the office now are starting to learn that actually it's harder to design like that. It's actually it's more challenging to design like that. It's probably more satisfying at the end of the day. And I think also as a user experience, if that's a hotel, it's a student, the user experience of being in those environments, I think is what then actually we should really be looking to do, is make sure that we're delivering architecture that actually creates that moment for someone for the first time going, I just love the way that palm tree shadow just falls on that wall. It's just perfect, And I think that sometimes with the preoccupation with the end product, the CGIs, the visuals, the shiny bit, I think, we can all do that. And I think at some point, we'll be all able to find the skill set and eventually even the construction techniques will that become so much easier to deliver. But I think for the time being, getting back to the basics of being the master builder, being the architect that can control every detail, I think is what they're now starting to get enthusiastic again about.
Right. Yeah. I think you touched upon this a little while earlier as well, wherein you were sort of noticing a trend even in magazines and media online, where this seems to be the direction that everyone is going towards as well. Is that something which you see being pushed quite heavily in the region, in Dubai even specifically? Is that the direction everyone wants to go to now?
Maybe less so in this region than I would maybe say maybe Europe or North America. And I think it's probably not necessarily because of anything other than the materials. Right. And I've never really seen brick as being a fundamental building material from this region, because it's not. And I think that whilst that maybe has started to develop a particular style that you can start to see emerging now, as I say, in the Northern Hemisphere, you look at those buildings and you could say, well, actually, we could find another way to replace the brick. But actually, what we're really interested in here is maybe how the arcade space that is being created at the ground floor is the transitioning space, which has been in Arabian architecture for centuries.
Correct.
And what's relevant about that, or going back to the context that I talked about earlier, why would we choose to follow a style if it wasn't relevant? Well, actually, maybe we're not following a style. What we're following here is some fundamental architectural principles that having shade in this country is more important than in a cold European city. So what we're looking at now is saying, well, actually, could that be done in GRC, or could that be done in Adobe Render? And trying to actually find a modernity in this kind of traditional architecture that is more contextual, that is more rooted in this region, but is probably actually even environmentally better, because again, we're not importing materials from halfway around the world because we want to look like something you've just seen in Detail magazine, because that brick factory in Germany was 5 kilometers up the road, and that's how they got their LEED
Correct.
their LEED accreditation. So, we're doing LEED buildings for schools now, but what we're basing that on is our fundamental understanding of the environment that we're designing in, appreciating the vernacular architecture, what we can learn from that, be it courtyards, be it narrow windows, be it deep windows,
right?
To offset a lot of the maybe the mistakes that you were referring to earlier, where people are applying a style to a building and actually not really looking at its context and what it should be used for.
Yeah, I think that's a topic that comes up very often, especially when architects meet architects.
Yeah,
and I think an example that I keep giving a lot of people about it done correctly is Chedi, actually, wherein just the planning of it. I mean, if you kind of walk through as a designer, you can sort of see the attention given to arcades and walkways and corridors and just overall proportion of things and shade and shadow and all of that. Yeah. And you can very easily see how that can be done wrong. Yeah. There are many examples of that all over the place, wherein it becomes an afterthought that, we need to stick, this bargee looking thing on a roof and, it's now, designed for context per se, which is sad, but hopefully, things do get better at some point. I kind of now, again, want to dive a little deeper into your career.
Okay.
If I may.
Yeah, sure.
A big problem that fresh grads have now is the thought of longevity seems very alien to them.
Yeah.
The thought of them having to be with one firm for a better part of their entire career seems quite alien in the sense that they don't necessarily see why they would do that. And they don't see that it even can be done at the moment, which is just how it is.
Okay, yeah.
So for someone who has done that clearly with Gage, I kind of want to get your thoughts about how does one go about doing that? Obviously, do you think it can be done in today's world with the kind of fresh grads that we're having with their, sort of mindset and expectations from the field? Those are the two things.
Yeah, look, it's very interesting. I think I don't advocate longevity if you can't get up in the morning and want to go to work. I mean, it doesn't have to be architecture. It can be any career. And I think that we're fortunate. We're in a profession that offers us challenges every day, whether it's running a business, finding business, obsessing about the color of the stone, the detail of the glass to the window. It's what we do. It's just part of our makeup. And I think that I would advocate probably the opposite when you come out of university. That I think you need to experiment. I think you need to get out there. You need to absorb. And if that absorption is coming from traveling, if it's from meeting other architects, if it's going to site, if it's doing a course in bricklaying, whatever it is, because I just think that the way that education is being delivered at the moment is probably the best it's ever been. I think the exposure that we have to design, everybody has their phone. It's a piece of design in itself. And then they are just constantly surrounded, more so than maybe when I was at university, where you had to go to the library, pick up a periodical, search for a certain building because
it just wasn't there.
It just didn't exist in a digital format. And you looked forward every month to a new magazine coming in because that's where you got your kind of update on trends or materials or your favorite architect. So I think that it starts way back then. And I think you need in those early formative years to see it as an apprenticeship. You really do. And that apprenticeship just leads to a lifelong passion of just wanting to learn more and more about it. And as I said, we've been so fortunate that we're now working in Saudi because, again, it's just opened up another avenue of architecture that I didn't even know existed. And for me, my longevity has probably come from just wanting to ensure that when I come to work every day, that it's a team of people that I really enjoy working with. It's a team of people that, we all share the workload. We all are kind of invested in each other in terms of making sure that there's a good balance to work life. And I think that maybe that's not something that we talk enough about as architects, because along with that first lecture that we have, they're pressing you from day one to do your all-nighter in the first week because it's like an initiation. And I'm kind of thinking, but that's awful. I mean, why are we as a profession advocating that we need people to be able to stay awake for 24 hours? I've never subscribed to it. I think it's completely wrong. And I think that going to bed at the reasonable time, getting up earlier and coming into the office when it's quiet, that's a harder skill to
right.
to condition yourself to want to do, but you'll be much more creative in that 2 hours in the morning than you will be at 3 o'clock in the morning trying to stay awake. So I think we've got a lot of things right in the profession, but I think there's a few old fashioned ideas that are still there. So coming back to what young graduates should be doing is enjoying architecture, enjoying it for what it is, which is an amazing opportunity to be involved with, like living in Dubai, some amazing projects, amazing clients, amazing climate. And the challenges that go with delivering that, with some of the time pressures that we have, the climate that we have to work in, which I said in one sentence is amazing, but then also how harsh it can be and how we have to think about how we detail here. So that's what kind of gives you the passion. That's what gets you coming to work every day. And I've just been fortunate that with guys that I met Brian when the practice was maybe 7 or 8 people. And we've just, each project has brought another reason to want to get involved with that. And that's led to another one, to another one, to another one. And before you know it, it's 5 years, it's 10 years, it's 20 years. And you still want to come in and sit with the team and share ideas. So enjoying it, I think, is maybe the nutshell of that one.
Awesome. Having fun. That's the summary.
Yeah, that's different. But I think enjoying it is certainly a big part of what with job satisfaction, I think, is what they should really look to balance out.
Right. I think you touched upon work-life balance. I think that's maybe another big factor, which a lot of people are struggling with. Some people have it right for sure. Yeah. But generally speaking, I feel that there are quite a bit of designers that still haven't got it worked out.
Yeah.
I kind of then want to get your opinion on, you said that most architects tend to absorb, and you do that, with your travels, with your site work, with your projects and so on. I keep having to justify to, I call them muggles, non-designers.
Yeah, okay.
I keep having to justify to them, I may spend 15 minutes in a hotel corridor, kind of just looking at, ceiling details and things like that, when everybody else kind of just walks through aimlessly. Yeah. And I'm sure that most designers are guilty of that.
Yeah.
And I keep having to tell them that architecture, to me at least, is sort of a lifestyle career. I don't know if I necessarily completely turn off after work.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I sort of feel much like, I don't want to compare us to, professional athletes, for example, but that again is sort of like a lifestyle career, wherein your lifestyle, kind of has to move around your career. So I guess I want to get your opinion on it. Do you think architecture is a lifestyle career?
I think you have to be dedicated, for sure. I don't think anybody could want to sign up to a course that's as long as it is.
Right.
That gets you to a point where when you've finally qualified, you're right at the bottom of the ladder. Yeah.
So I thought I was making my way up.
Yeah, exactly. And then you suddenly realize that I'm folding drawings and making coffee in my first year, thinking that I've got, 2 degrees and I've got a professional qualification. I've got this, I've got that. And I'm folding drawings. It's only until you're stood on site and there's real pressure to get that drawing to somebody because they have to do something immediately, and you realize that you folded it the wrong way and you can't find the drawing number. So why did they get me to do that? Well, it's because when you need it, you know where it is and you know how to file it. And that self-discipline that comes from, as you say, living it, and that attention to detail, which I maybe referred to earlier as well, where that really should go through all of our lives in many ways. But I think as architects, we are particularly obsessed with it because whether it is a light cove detail, whether it's how you fold the drawing, it's where to go to find the drawing. That's what we rely on, because at the end of the day, there are so many aspects to our career that, again, maybe when you're in college, you're obsessed with design. It's only when you leave that, I suppose, that slightly naive bubble and come into the reality of building a project and dealing with the number of stakeholders and authorities and decisions that you have to make on a daily basis, and sometimes under enormous pressure, that you need that self-discipline. So it is hard to switch off. It really is. But I think that, that's just one side of our profession. I think that's equally balanced by 4 years of hard work and then standing there on day one, opening the doors and, seeing kindergarten kids using your building and enjoying it. And I think that, you very quickly forget about all the hard work that went into it, and you just observe, you absorb that moment. And I think that that's sometimes something that we forget, is that we made this conscious decision to sign up to a very difficult course and probably now actually quite a difficult profession in terms of just where we are in a global economy. But you you enjoy it. I think it's very hard for me not to be an architect every day of the week, because no matter what it is, you'll see a pattern, you'll see a texture, you'll see a different way of designing something, or just something that sparks a bit of interest. And for me, being paid to draw it's kind of like, well, I could never imagine sitting down and having to write all day for a living or to do anything else other than just, being paid to draw. And I think that it's such a privilege at times. And as I say, look, I'm making that now sound maybe incredibly romantic, but it's tough. I mean, it's a tough profession to be in. And the structural engineer 1 minute, the mechanical engineer the next minute, and have to be able to try and balance all these things out. I totally agree with you. It is so hard to switch off. But that's not to say that that's not enjoyable at times. Right. I think just absorbing and learning from other architects and how they've detailed something, I think is just part of our joy of, again, I don't have to read a book to learn that. I can just go and see it in a building, and I can just appreciate all the thought and creativity that's gone into executing, a beautiful detail. So
true. No, absolutely. I think if you're passionate about the field that we are in, I think that would come as second nature. So I think you're absolutely on the button with that. As we sort of wind down the episode, I typically like to ask this question, and maybe if you've heard a few of the episodes, maybe you already have an idea. But if not, don't feel obliged to answer. This is kind of just to sort of see where your headspace is at in terms of design generally. Yeah. So it's, of course, the utopian question. Okay. So the utopian question is, you get a client that comes to you and says, hey, Jason, I have 100,000 square foot plot in Dubai. Here's a blank check. Feel free to build, design anything that you please. But the only criteria, the only brief is it needs to add value back to the city of Dubai. That's the context. So in that, you can take your time, because it is quite a heavy question, I understand, but it's just something to maybe get our listeners into your headspace. What are you thinking about? What do you think will add value to the city at the moment? And now you have a client who's willing to build it and pay for it as well.
Like, I was going to say, I can introduce you to them. I think, wow, it's an amazing question, and it's certainly one I wasn't prepared for. I think Dubai is, it's a great city. I mean, we've made it our home. My kids were born here. They're going to school here. They've loved growing up here. And I think that maybe for me at the moment, it's not one site and it's not one project. And I think if there's one thing that we need to do to round the circle on Dubai at the moment, I think is connecting it better for pedestrians. So maybe I'd spend my money slightly differently. And I think that what I would look to do is to bring an element of that kind of glue, the kind of urban glue that sticks all these communities together now. And somehow we can do it in a way that's fun and engaging and part of a lifestyle choice that maybe actually, I can live at this end of the city and I could cycle to work. And maybe because I left London, I came here. I grew up in Ireland where everything was just, a 2-minute cycle away. But I worked in London for a number of years, and the commute was part of my, it's just my window into the world every day, because I would, cycle and I'd have to go through Oxford Circus and I'd cycle over to the East End, and just the cultural, the variety, everything that you could see in a day, or the rain or whatever it was. It just connected you with the city. And I think it just made you feel like I'm part of this, and the output at the end of the day is just contributing again to another day living in London. And I think that sometimes Dubai can be a little bit isolating, because we jump in our car. Right. Maybe you switch a really good podcast on like this, or maybe you
shameless plug.
Yeah, shameless plug. But anyway, or maybe you listen to the radio, or maybe you do nothing because you just need
that's
that
your own time. Yeah.
But I think that there's lots of us. We're not sitting on a tube or a metro, which is sitting in cars isolated. And I think just to be able to find a way now to maybe take that money and spend it on a network of cycle paths and nature trails and things that would just allow everyone to just interact. And I think maybe it's more present now with coming out of a COVID environment, where the value that we all found from being able to just go outside when it felt like, the walls were closing in, I think maybe might be, again, one of these great upsides of having lived the way we've lived for the last year, to go to, you know what, the next time I get the chance to walk 2 kilometers to work and the weather is allowing me to do it, I'm going to do it. And I think that the paranoia maybe around confined spaces for people that were already nervous around being in those areas. Now with the pandemic, again, the decision to not want to have to do that and actually be in the open air might, again, just lead to a healthier lifestyle, which comes back to the work-life balance, that, you know, suddenly that becomes part of your day without even
realizing
knowing
it. Yeah.
that you've walked 2 kilometers or cycled or whatever it is. So maybe it isn't one project, but maybe it's a linear project that just does more to connect the dots.
Right. No, I think that's a very valid project to kind of want to do, because there's forever been the debate, well, not forever, but there's always been the debate of, you know, from a city point of view, how sort of Sheikh Zayed Road, for example, just kind of fractures, you know, both ends of the city on either end. And even, you know, these communities that come up, you know, things like the ranches and sustainable city and so on. When you're inside, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
But if you had to go from one to the other, there's probably no real pedestrian way to do so. And I think investigating how to, you know, like you very aptly said, you know, being the glue, like the project being the glue, bringing all of this together, I think that's brilliant. I think that's also something which the new 2040, you know, master plan is aiming to address. So money well spent in the right area.
Yeah, well, like, look, I mean, I think that the new 2040 vision, I mean, recognizes that we need to get that connectivity back. But I think that more importantly, it's stopping the sprawl. I mean, you know, why has the city evolved the way it is, and why are these big arteries, you know, really driving this kind of polarization of certain parts of Dubai? And I think that filling in those gaps is logical. It just conserves, again, that idea of having a nucleus, having things within sensible distances, and rather than just finding another piece of land a bit further out into the desert because either it's cheaper or, you know, it's more convenient. I think that we have a duty to again re-examine some land uses and actually start to say, well, look, I think we can add benefit to people by starting to look at maybe turning them into parks and reducing the amount of heat buildup from surfaces because everything's become too paved. So finding a way now to just introduce some of that back into the city, I think, is a fantastic idea. And I'm so glad that, you know, it's now starting to give people this objective in terms of what's the profession moving towards, in terms of what's Dubai's bigger vision. I think it's the timing is perfect for that.
Awesome. So, Jason, as the very last question of the episode, this was something I was thinking about, and it's sort of a selfish question, if I must be honest, which is quite simply put, at this point in your career, with the kind of work you've done, you've been in Dubai for a considerable amount of time and so on. Considering all of that, as a designer, what's next for Jason?
Going home and having some food, I think. I mean, it's been a long day. Joking aside, I think that, look, I'm very, I feel very privileged that I'm with a group of kind of colleagues that, as I say, you know, we've got a great energy. We work together really well. We've come off the back of some really tough competitions. It's been, you know, a lot of stress, and for me, I just want to try to, for as long as I can, continue to just surround myself and be in those environments. And I think for the time being, there's certainly no immediate plans to change anything. I mean, I'm very, very comfortable with where I'm at and what we're doing. Looking to the future, obviously, the region offers great potential for all of us as designers. And I can see myself and my family being here for a lot longer. So we're very happy here. I think what I need to do now, maybe for my own long-term objectives, I think is aligned with that. It's just seeing now what the next step in terms of maybe potentially different types of project. I'm hoping that education continues to be there to kind of keep us motivated and inspired, working with potentially new clients in new regions and just trying to bring some of the experience as a company that we've developed over the years to that. So it's not going to differ too much from what we're currently doing. I think it's maybe just exposing that now to hopefully more markets. And excited to see what Dubai offers us as well over the next I better be careful. If my wife listens to this, she's not going to like the next 20 years. It's already been 20 years. But yeah, let's see. I think it feels like we're at a real turning point again. And I hope that for all of us, as I say, as a profession, we continue to benefit from being here.
Awesome. On that note, Jason, on behalf of the aForm team, we'd like to thank you. Thank you for giving us your time. I know it has been a long day for you, and thank you so much for just believing in the vision that we have for this little podcast that we have going on. If any of our listeners, sort of want to, get in touch with you or want to maybe grab a coffee or anything of that nature, what would be the best way for them to sort of go about that?
Look, I mean, as I say, if they want, I suppose through yourself,
Okay.
just setting up
Sure.
an opportunity to, as you say, maybe we've got so much social media these days. I think
Right.
most people can find me on LinkedIn.
Right.
Most people know the website address for the company, so you'll get all the details that you need from that. But I'm always here, and I'm always keen to connect with architects and just share ideas. It's part of what we do.
Awesome. Great. So on that note, Jason, thank you so much. And we will catch you guys next week. Fellow aFormers, thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being part of our journey, and thank you for the immense support we've been receiving for our episodes. It has and continues to be a very bumpy road, but we wouldn't want it any other way. If you enjoyed this episode and it brought you value, please share this episode with anyone who may benefit from it. But of course, if you loved the episode, follow us on Instagram and LinkedIn, send us a little DM, and we may just send you a secret link to a secret episode which we've been working on. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. See you next time. Keep sketching.